The air smelled of dust and dry grass, the kind of heat that sits heavy on the shoulders and never quite lifts. David had not been back to the reserve in 2 decades. The roads were different now, paved in places, marked with signs he didn't recognize. But the land beyond the gates still stretched wide and golden, exactly as he remembered it. He had come alone, driving slowly past the clusters of acacia and thorn, past the dried riverbed where he used to sit in the mornings and watch the world wake up. He wasn't sure what had drawn him back. Maybe it was the quiet. Maybe it was the need to see if the place still felt the same. Maybe it was something older than that. He parked near the edge of the grassland and stepped out into the sun. The guide had offered to come with him, but David had declined. He wanted to be alone for this. He walked slowly, careful not to disturb the rhythm of the place. The grass was tall, waist-high in some places, bending gently in the breeze. Birds called from distant trees. Somewhere far off, a herd of impala grazed in the shade. Everything felt still. Everything felt waiting. And then he saw it, a shape in the grass, perhaps 50 meters ahead, dark against the gold, massive, unmoving. David stopped walking, his breath caught in his chest, not from fear, but from something quieter, recognition without proof. The shape did not flee. It did not crouch or retreat. Instead, it rose, slowly, heavily, a lion, male, enormous. His mane was thick and dark, streaked with gray along the edges. His shoulders were broad, his frame powerful despite the weight of age. And his face bore scars. Deep lines carved across his muzzle, over one eye, down the side of his jaw. Marks of survival, marks of years. David stood frozen. The lion stood facing him, head lowered slightly, ears forward. Not aggressive, not defensive, just watching. The distance between them felt both infinite and impossibly small. David's heart was pounding now, not in panic, but in something he couldn't name. He had raised dozens of animals over the years. He had bottle-fed cubs, nursed injured cheetahs, released young elephants back into the wild. But that had been decades ago. He had been young then. The world had been different, and the animals he had cared for, most of them were long gone. But this lion, David took one slow breath, then another. The lion did not move. His eyes were amber, steady, unblinking. There was something in the way he held himself, the tilt of his head, the tension in his shoulders that felt familiar. Not just familiar, known. David felt his throat tighten. He had raised a cub once, a male, tiny, sickly, abandoned by his mother in the first weeks of life. David had fed him every 3 hours, slept beside him on the floor of the sanctuary office, wrapped him in blankets when the nights grew cold. The cub had been fragile then, too small, too weak, but he had survived. And when he was old enough, David had released him here, into this very reserve. That had been 23 years ago. The lion before him now did not move, did not retreat, did not charge. He simply stood, massive and scarred, watching the man who had stopped in the grass. David's hands trembled slightly. He did not know if it was possible. He did not know if memory could cross that kind of distance. But something in him, something deep and quiet and certain, whispered that it could. He took one step forward, then stopped. The lion's ears flicked once. His tail swayed, low and slow. David could see the rise and fall of his chest, the way his muscles shifted beneath the weight of his frame. He was older now, older than most wild lions ever lived to be. But he was here, he was whole, and he had not run. David did not call out, he did not move closer. He simply stood, breathing, watching, letting the moment stretch between them like something sacred. The wind moved through the grass. The sun hung low and golden in the sky, and the lion, scarred and silent, remained exactly where he was standing in the open, facing the man who had once held him in his arms when he was small enough to fit in the curve of a blanket. And somewhere deep in the stillness, something unspoken passed between them. Not words, not certainty, just the faint, impossible echo of recognition. The lion began to move, not quickly, not with the sudden burst of a predator closing distance, but slowly, deliberately, each step measured and intentional. His head remained low, his amber eyes locked on David's face. The grass parted around him as he walked. his massive paws silent against the earth. David's pulse roared in his ears, but he did not move. He did not step back. He stood exactly where he was, hands loose at his sides, breathing through the weight pressing against his chest. Behind him, the guide's voice came low and urgent. "Don't move. Stay absolutely still." The man had appeared from the edge of the tree line, radio in hand, eyes wide. He had seen lions before. He had tracked them, observed them, respected them from a distance. But this was different. This was a full-grown male, scarred and powerful, walking directly toward a man standing alone in the open. The guide's hand hovered near the flare gun on his belt, but he did not draw it. Not yet. Something in the lion's posture held him back, something that did not read as aggression. David heard the warning, but he did not acknowledge it. His eyes stayed fixed on the lion. The way he moved was familiar, not just in size or shape, but in rhythm. The slight drag of his left hind leg, the way his shoulders rolled with each step, the tilt of his head, cocked just slightly to the right, as if listening to something beyond sound. David had seen that tilt before, years ago, in a cub who used to follow him around the sanctuary yard, stumbling over his own paws, pressing his small body against David's leg whenever thunder rolled across the hills. The lion was closer now, 10 meters, then 8, then 5. The guide whispered something else, but David couldn't hear it anymore. The world had narrowed to the space between them. The lion's breath was audible now, deep and steady. His mane lifted slightly in the breeze. The scars on his face were clearer up-close old wounds, long-healed, etched into the skin like stories written in flesh. One ran across his brow, just above his right eye. Another traced the line of his jaw. David's throat tightened. He remembered treating a cut once on a young lion who had tangled with a thorn bush. The wound had been small then, barely visible, but it had healed in the same place. The lion stopped, just 3 meters away, close enough that David could see the flecks of gold in his eyes, close enough to hear the low rumble building in his chest. Not a growl, not a warning, something else, something deeper. The sound vibrated through the air, through the ground, through David's bones. It was a sound lions made to each other, a greeting, a recognition, a call that said, "I know you." David's hands trembled. He felt the sting of tears at the corners of his eyes, but he did not blink them away. The lion's gaze did not waver. His ears were forward, relaxed. His tail hung low, swaying gently. There was no tension in his stance, no coiling of muscle, no preparation to spring. He simply stood, breathing, watching, waiting. And then he did something that made David's breath catch in his throat. The lion lowered his head further, not in submission, not in threat, but in the way an animal lowers its head to something it trusts, the way a cub might press its forehead against a caretaker's hand. David's chest ached. He wanted to reach out, wanted to touch the scarred face before him, to run his fingers through the thick mane, to feel the warmth of the animal he had once cradled in his arms. But he did not move. He knew better. This was not a cub anymore. This was a wild lion, a king of this land, a creature who had survived droughts and fights and hunts and years that David could only imagine. But the way he stood, the way he looked at him, it was the same. David's voice came out barely above a whisper. "It's you, isn't it?" The lion rumbled again, louder this time. His eyes did not leave David's face, and then, with a slowness that felt almost reverent, the lion took one more step forward, close enough now that David could feel the heat radiating from his body, close enough that if he wanted to, the lion could end this in a heartbeat. But he didn't. He simply stood, breathing in David's scent, his nostrils flaring slightly. His whiskers twitched, his ears rotated, catching every sound. And for a long, impossible moment, the two of them existed in a space outside of time, outside of logic, a man and a lion, separated by 20 years and an entire lifetime, standing face to face in the golden afternoon light. The guide was still frozen at the edge of the clearing, radio clutched in his hand, unable to move, unable to speak. He had never seen anything like this. He had worked with lions for 15 years, and he had never seen one approach a human this way. Not with curiosity, not with recognition, not with something that looked almost like tenderness. David felt a tear slip down his cheek. He did not wipe it away. The lion's gaze softened, just slightly. His rumble faded into a low, rhythmic purr, a sound most people never got to hear from a lion, a sound reserved for safety, for comfort, for home. And in that moment, David knew. He didn't need proof. He didn't need confirmation. He knew. This was the cub he had raised, the fragile, sickly infant who had clung to life with a stubbornness that had astonished everyone. The young lion who had followed him everywhere, who had slept curled against his chest, who had looked at him with eyes that seemed to hold an entire world of trust. He was still here. After all these years, he was still here. The moment shattered like glass. A low snarl cut through the stillness, sharp and foreign. It did not come from the scarred lion standing before David. It came from the tree line, from the shadows beneath the acacias where the light did not quite reach. David's breath caught. The lion's entire body shifted in an instant. His head lifted, his ears swiveled backward. The rumble in his chest died, replaced by something harder, something colder. His eyes left David's face for the first time since he had approached, and his gaze fixed on the trees. David turned slowly, carefully, following the lion's line of sight. And then he saw them, 3 lions, males, younger than the scarred lion, their manes fuller, darker, untouched by gray. They emerged from the shadows one by one, moving with the kind of confidence that comes from strength in numbers. Their shoulders rolled with each step. Their eyes were hard, calculating. They did not look at David, not yet. Their attention was locked entirely on the older lion, the one standing just meters away from a human, the one who had claimed this territory long before they arrived. The guide's voice came again, quieter this time, edged with urgency. "David, move, slowly, back toward me." But David did not move. He could not. His legs felt rooted to the earth, his body frozen in the space between the scarred lion and the approaching pride. He could feel the tension radiating from the animal beside him, could see the way his muscles coiled beneath his skin, the way his claws extended slightly into the dirt. The lion's tail lashed once, sharp and deliberate, a warning, a declaration. The younger males spread out as they advanced, forming a loose semicircle. They moved with purpose, their heads low, their eyes never leaving the scarred lion. This was not a hunt, this was something else, a challenge, a test of dominance. David had read about this. He had seen footage, heard stories from researchers. When young males reached their prime, they sought out territory. And when they found an older male, one who had held his ground for years, who had survived longer than most, they came to take what was his. The scarred lion did not retreat. He stood his ground, his weight shifting forward onto his front paws. His breath came heavier now, visible in the cooling air. David could hear it, deep and rhythmic, a sound that seemed to echo in his chest. The lion's gaze moved between the 3 younger males, tracking each one, calculating. He was outnumbered, he was older, but he did not back down. One of the younger males snarled again, louder this time, his lips pulling back to reveal teeth as long as a man's fingers. He took a step closer, then another. The other 2 flanked him, moving in tandem, their bodies low and deliberate. They were testing him, waiting to see if he would run, waiting to see if age had stolen his nerve. And then the scarred lion did something David did not expect. He stepped forward, not toward the younger males, toward David. One deliberate step, then another, until he was standing directly in front of him, between him and the approaching pride. His massive frame blocked David entirely, his mane filling David's vision, his scent earthy and wild and familiar filling the air. David's heart hammered in his chest. The lion's tail lashed again, harder this time, brushing against David's leg. It was not accidental. It was intentional, a placement, a position. The younger males paused, their eyes narrowed. They had expected the older lion to defend his territory. They had expected aggression, posturing, perhaps even a fight. But this was something else. The scarred lion was not defending land. He was defending the man standing behind him. David's throat tightened. His hands trembled at his sides. He wanted to speak, wanted to tell the lion to run, to save himself, to let David face whatever came next alone. But the words would not come, and even if they had, He knew the lion would not have listened. This was not about logic. This was not about survival. This was about something older, something deeper. The lead male snarled again, his frustration rising. He took another step forward, his shoulders bunching, his claws scraping against the dirt. The scarred lion did not flinch. He planted his weight deeper into the earth, his body a wall between David and the threat before them, his head lowered slightly, his ears flattening against his skull. And then, from deep within his chest, came a sound that made the air itself seem to tremble. A roar. Not the rumble David had heard before, not the soft greeting of recognition. This was the sound of a king, of a lion who had ruled these lands for years, who had fought and bled and survived when so many others had fallen. It tore through the clearing, raw and primal and unbroken. It carried across the grassland, into the trees, into the sky. Birds scattered from the branches, the younger males froze, their ears flattening, their bodies tensing. The scarred lion roared again, louder this time, longer. His entire body vibrated with the force of it, his mane bristling, his tail lashing. David felt the sound in his bones, felt it shake through the ground beneath his feet. And in that moment he understood. This was not just a defense, this was a proclamation, a statement that said, "This is mine, he is mine, and you will not take him." The younger males hesitated, their confidence wavered. They glanced at each other, their bodies shifting uneasily. The lead male took one step back, then another. His snarl faded into a low growl, uncertain, testing. But the scarred lion did not relent. He took another step forward, forcing them back, his roar still echoing in the air. His message was clear. He would not yield, he would not run, and he would not let them pass. For a long moment, the clearing held its breath. The younger males stood frozen, their eyes locked on the scarred lion, weighing their options. They were stronger together. They were younger, faster, less worn by time. But the lion before them was not afraid, and fear, in the wild, was a currency more valuable than strength. Slowly, reluctantly, the lead male turned. His companions followed, their tails low, their heads still turned back toward the scarred lion. They did not run, but they did not advance. They moved back toward the tree line, their snarls fading into silence, their bodies disappearing into the shadows from which they had come. The scarred lion watched them go. He did not relax, not yet. His muscles remained taut, his breathing heavy, his gaze fixed on the trees until the last of them vanished from sight. Only then did his body begin to ease, the tension bleeding out of him in slow, deliberate waves. David stood behind him, his chest heaving, his eyes wet. The lion did not turn around, not immediately. He remained facing the tree line, standing guard, making sure the threat was truly gone. And David, standing in the shadow of the animal who had once been small enough to hold, felt something break open inside him, something he had carried for 20 years without knowing it. The lion had not forgotten, even after all this time, even after all the years and scars and battles, he had not forgotten. The younger males did not leave, not entirely. They lingered at the edge of the tree line, their forms half hidden in shadow, their eyes still fixed on the scarred lion. They paced along the boundary, restless, testing, their tails flicked in sharp, agitated movements. Their low growls carried across the clearing, softer now but still present, still probing for weakness. They had retreated, yes, but they had not surrendered. The scarred lion remained exactly where he was. His body had not relaxed. His muscles stayed coiled, ready, his breathing still heavy from the roar that had shaken the air moments before. David could see the rise and fall of his ribs, could see the way his claws dug into the earth as if anchoring himself to the ground. The lion's gaze never wavered from the tree line. He was waiting, watching, making sure they understood. David stood behind him, his own breath coming in shallow bursts. His legs felt weak beneath him, but he did not move. He did not dare. The guide had gone silent, still frozen at the clearing's edge, his hand still hovering near the flare gun, but never reaching for it. He had seen what David had seen. He had watched the scarred lion place himself between the man and the threat. He had watched him hold his ground against 3 younger, stronger males, and he had watched them retreat. But this was not over. Not yet. One of the younger males stepped forward again, Not the leader this time, but one of the others, leaner, his mane darker, his movements more cautious. He did not charge, he did not snarl. He simply moved closer, testing the boundary the scarred lion had drawn. His eyes were locked on David now, curious, calculating. He had seen lions defend kills before. He had seen them defend cubs, defend mates, defend territory. But this was something else. A lion defending a human. It made no sense. And in the wild, things that made no sense were either ignored or challenged. The scarred lion saw him move, his ears flattened against his skull, his tail lashed once, hard enough to make a sound as it cut through the air. And then he did something that made David's breath stop entirely. He roared again. But this time, it was different. This was not a warning. This was not a threat. This was a declaration of absolute dominance. The sound tore from his chest with a force that seemed impossible for a body his age, for lungs that had breathed through so many years. It was deeper than before, longer, more visceral. It did not just fill the clearing, it filled the entire landscape. It rolled across the grassland like thunder, bouncing off the distant hills, reverberating through the bones of every living thing within earshot. David felt it in his chest, felt it shake through his ribs, felt it press against his skin like a physical force. The younger male stopped mid-step. His body went rigid, his ears pinned flat against his head, and for the first time, his gaze dropped, not to the ground, not in submission, but away from the scarred lion's eyes, away from the challenge. The other two males shifted uneasily, their pacing slowing, their growls fading into silence. They were listening now, truly listening, and what they heard was not the roar of an old lion clinging to fading strength. What they heard was the voice of a king who had never been dethroned. The scarred lion took one step forward. His weight sank into the earth, his claws extending fully, his mane bristling until he looked twice his size. He did not charge. He did not need to. His presence alone was enough. He stood there, massive and unyielding, his body a living barrier between David and the world beyond. And then he roared again and again, each one deeper than the last, each one carrying a message so clear it needed no translation. You will not pass. You will not take him. You will not win. David's vision blurred. Tears streamed down his face, hot and unchecked. His hands were shaking, his entire body trembling with something he could not name. He had seen lions before, he had worked with them, studied them, released them into the wild, but he had never seen this. He had never seen one stand so completely, so utterly, for something other than survival. This was not instinct. This was not territorial defense. This was something else, something that transcended the logic of the wild. The lead male finally moved. He stepped back from the tree line, his head lowering slightly, his body turning to the side. It was not a full retreat. Not yet, but it was acknowledgement. He looked at the scarred lion one last time, his eyes hard, calculating, and then he turned and walked deeper into the trees. The other two hesitated, glancing at each other, their bodies still tense, but one by one they followed. Their forms disappeared into the shadows, their growls fading into the rustling of leaves and the distant calls of birds. The clearing fell silent. The scarred lion stood motionless for a long moment, his breathing heavy, his body still braced for another challenge. His ears rotated slowly, catching every sound, making sure they were truly gone. His tail continued to lash, slower now, but still vigilant. And then, finally, his muscles began to ease. The tension bled out of his shoulders, out of his legs, out of the rigid line of his spine. His breathing slowed, his claws retracted, and for the first time since the younger males had appeared, he turned his head. He looked back at David. His amber eyes were tired, deeply tired, the kind of exhaustion that comes not from physical exertion, but from carrying something too heavy for too long. There were no words for what passed between them in that moment, no language that could capture it, but David felt it. He felt the weight of what the lion had just done. He felt the years of survival, the battles fought, the scars earned. He felt the impossible truth that this animal, this wild, untamed creature had chosen to protect him, not because he had to, not because it served some instinct, but because somewhere, buried beneath all the years and all the distance, something remained. A memory, a bond, a promise that had never been broken. David's voice came out as barely a whisper. "Thank you." The lion did not respond. He simply held David's gaze for one more breath, and then, slowly, he turned back toward the tree line. His body was still tense, still ready, but the immediate threat had passed. The younger males had left. For now, that was enough. The guide finally moved, stepping cautiously into the clearing, his eyes wide, his face pale. He looked at David, then at the lion, then back at David. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came. What could he possibly say? What words existed for what he had just witnessed? David did not look at him. His eyes stayed on the scarred lion, on the massive frame still standing between him and the world, on the animal who had saved his life without hesitation. The sun was sinking lower now, casting long shadows across the grass. The light turned golden, soft, painting everything in hues of amber and rust. And in that light, the lion stood scarred, weary, unbroken, a king who had never stopped being one. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of breath and heartbeat and the slow return of the world. The wind moved through the grass again, bending the tall stalks in gentle waves. Somewhere in the distance, a bird called. The sun continued its descent, turning the sky into shades of rose and amber. And in the center of the clearing, the scarred lion stood, his body still angled toward the tree line, his vigilance unbroken. David did not move. He could not. His legs felt like they had been carved from stone, his body rooted to the earth by something heavier than fear, deeper than relief. The guide had stepped closer now, but he kept his distance, his presence hovering at the edge of David's awareness. The man's hand had finally left the flare gun. His radio hung loose at his side. He stood there, silent, watching, bearing witness to something he would never be able to explain. The lion's breathing had slowed. His tail no longer lashed. His ears rotated gently, catching the sounds of the reserve settling back into itself. He stood there for a long time, minutes stretching into something that felt eternal. And then, slowly, he turned his head, not toward the tree line, toward David. Their eyes met one last time. There was no rumble this time, no sound. Just the weight of his gaze, amber and ancient and impossibly gentle. David felt his throat tighten again, felt fresh tears spill over, but he did not look away. He could not. He wanted to memorize this. Every detail. The way the light caught in the lion's mane, the scars that mapped a lifetime across his face, the way his eyes held something that looked almost like peace. David wanted to hold on to this moment, to press it into his memory so deeply that time could never erode it. The lion blinked once, slow, deliberate, and then he turned away. He did not turn back toward the tree line where the younger males had disappeared. He turned toward the open grassland, toward the horizon where the sun was sinking low, and the world stretched out in endless gold. He took one step, then another. His gait was slow, measured, the weight of age evident in the way his shoulders moved, the way his paws pressed into the earth. But there was no hesitation, no uncertainty. He walked with purpose, with dignity, with the quiet confidence of a creature who had earned every step. And then, from the edges of the clearing, others appeared. Lionesses, 3 of them. They emerged from the tall grass like ghosts made flesh, their bodies low and sleek, their movements fluid. They did not approach David. They did not even look at him. Their attention was fixed entirely on the scarred lion. They moved toward him in silence, falling into step beside him, their bodies brushing against his flanks. One of them nuzzled his shoulder gently, a gesture of greeting, of reassurance. He did not slow. He simply continued walking, and they walked with him. Behind them, smaller shapes appeared, cubs, 2 of them, young enough that their spots were still visible, their movements clumsy and playful. They bounded after the adults, their tails high, their energy untouched by the tension that had filled the clearing moments before. One of them pawed at the scarred lion's tail as it swayed, and he flicked it away without breaking stride. The lionesses kept pace with him, their bodies forming a loose formation around him, protective and familiar. David watched them move, watched the pride come together, watched them fall into the rhythm of the wild as if nothing had happened, as if the last 20 minutes had been a dream. But it had not been a dream. The scarred lion had stood between him and death. He had roared defiance into the face of younger, stronger challengers. He had chosen to protect a man he had not seen in 2 decades, and now he was walking away, back into the world he belonged to, the world David had released him into so long ago. The guide's voice came softly, barely above a whisper. "I've never seen anything like that." David did not respond. He could not find the words. His eyes stayed fixed on the lion, on the way his mane caught the last rays of sunlight, on the way his body moved with a kind of grace that seemed to transcend the wear of years. The pride was moving faster now, their forms growing smaller against the vastness of the grassland. The lionesses led the way, the cubs tumbling after them, and the scarred lion walked at the rear, his head still high, his gaze sweeping the horizon. David's chest ached. He wanted to call out, wanted to say something, anything, to mark this moment, to bridge the distance opening between them. But what could he possibly say? What words could carry the weight of what had just passed between them? So he stayed silent. He simply stood there, his hands loose at his sides, his face wet with tears he did not bother to wipe away, and watched the lion walk into the fading light. The pride moved toward the western edge of the reserve, toward the place where the grassland met the low hills, and the sky seemed to open up forever. The sun was almost gone now, just a sliver of fire on the horizon, painting everything in shades of gold and rose and deep, endless blue. The wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of earth and dry grass and the distant promise of rain. The cubs disappeared first, their small bodies swallowed by the tall grass. Then the lionesses, their sleek forms blending into the landscape until they were indistinguishable from shadow. And finally, the scarred lion. He paused at the crest of a small rise, his silhouette dark against the burning sky. For one long, breathless moment, he stood there, looking back. David could not see his eyes from this distance, could not see his face, but he felt it, felt the weight of that final glance, the unspoken goodbye that stretched across the space between them. And then the lion turned and walked over the rise, and he was gone. David stood in the clearing long after the pride had disappeared. The sun slipped below the horizon, and the sky deepened into twilight. The first stars appeared, faint and distant. The guide waited beside him, saying nothing, respecting the silence. And David simply breathed, in and out, slow and steady, letting the moment settle into his bones, into his heart, into the deepest parts of him that would carry it for the rest of his life. He had come back to the reserve looking for something. He had not known what, maybe closure, maybe confirmation that the work he had done all those years ago had mattered. Maybe just the need to see the place again, to remember what it felt like to be young and hopeful and convinced that love could cross any distance. And he had found his answer, not in words, not in certainty, but in the eyes of a scarred lion who had never forgotten, who had stood between him and death without hesitation, who had chosen him even after all these years, even after all the wildness that had claimed him. The wind moved through the grass one more time, soft and endless, and somewhere in the distance, carried on that wind, came the faint, unmistakable sound of a lion's call. Not a roar, just a low, rumbling vocalization, a sound that said, "I am here, I am alive, I remember." David closed his eyes and let the tears fall.